Fredo Suspended and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Fredo Suspended. And while we don't have a dumbest bill in America, this podcast, we are going to have a great one tomorrow. And we do have a Go Woke or Go Broke this podcast. First up, Fredo Suspended. Fredo Chris Cuomo, or Chris Fredo Cuomo, has officially been suspended from CNN. Now, of course, you may have heard that it is permanent. That actually isn't necessarily true. CNN says indefinitely. I love the word, indefinitely. So CNN, in the Daily Caller, it says suspends Chris Cuomo indefinitely. CNN announced Tuesday that Chris Cuomo would be suspended indefinitely following bombshell evidence that he worked closely with his brother, disgraced former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo amid allegations of sexual assault. The New York Attorney General's office released transcripts and exhibits Monday that shed new light on Chris Cuomo's involvement in his brother's defense. A CNN spokesperson said Tuesday, according to CNN. The documents, which were not privy to before their public release, raise serious questions. And so Brian Stelter, the eunuch at CNN, tweeted out, key part of at CNN PR statement, execs, quote, appreciated the unique position that he was in and understood his need, meaning Chris Cuomo's need, to put family first and jobs second, end quote. However, quote, these documents point to a greater level of involvement in his brother's efforts than we previously knew, end quote. That's Brian Stelter literally throwing Fredo under the bus. And I'm sure that, they were probably drinking buddies and eunuch buddies for years, but now apparently no more. So when Chris admitted to us that he had offered advice to his brother's staff, he broke our rules, and we acknowledged that publicly, CNN continued. But we also appreciate the unique position he was in and understood his need to put family first and jobs second. However, these documents point to a greater level of involvement in his brother's efforts than we previously knew. So in other words, he could be involved in his brother's gubernatorial campaigns and his brother's statements and the management and governing of the state of New York. Chris Cuomo could, but he got too involved. And this is supposed to be a media outlet. New York Attorney General Letitia James released Monday a transcript detailing that Chris Cuomo was involved in what appeared to be a cover-up in his brother's sexual assault case. The documents show Chris Cuomo used his contacts in the media to get more information about his brother's accusers and appeared to work with then top aide Melissa DeRosa about preparing responses for his brother. In one series of messages, DeRosa asked Chris Cuomo to check your sources about a rumor going around from Politico, 1 to 2 more people coming out tomorrow. Cuomo responded, on it, before following up 40 minutes later that no one has heard that yet. So in other words, there's Chris Cuomo. He's the true moneymaker, if there is such a term for CNN, but he's the guy that really kind of brings in the cash to CNN, and he's using his job while working at CNN, his office there, to literally campaign for his brother and to try to get his brother off the hook from being charged and, hey, potentially going to jail for committing all kinds of harassment acts, I suppose, with many, many different women. And by the way, this is not something that just happens one day when you get elected as governor. Clearly, Governor Cuomo was engaged in this kind of activity his entire career. So in CNN Business, so this is the company itself, CNN Business, they are reporting the following. CNN suspends Chris Cuomo indefinitely. This is CNN Business, which is really funny, because like how really big would the CNN Business desk be anyway? It's probably like one office away from Chris Cuomo. CNN has suspended primetime anchor Chris Cuomo indefinitely, pending further evaluation, after new documents revealed the cozy and improper nature of his relationship with aides to his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Podcast listeners, does anyone think that this is something that is new with Chris Cuomo? That's why we're reading these different stories. Does anyone in podcast land even believe for 1 minute that throughout Chris Cuomo's career that he hasn't been intimately involved in his governor's campaigns and covering things up for his brother, in not reporting bad information and only reporting good information? Does anyone think for 1 minute that this is something that Chris Cuomo hasn't been doing from the day one? And suddenly CNN gets this epiphany. Oh, this is really bad. So since this is so bad, we're going to make sure that we get rid of Chris Cuomo. Well, but Fredo is only indefinitely suspended, whatever that means. The benched anchorman declined to comment on Tuesday night, so Fredo hasn't spoken to anyone yet. A second hour of Anderson Cooper 360 aired in Cuomo's place on Tuesday night. A town hall about COVID-19 will air Wednesday night. Can't wait. Tuesday's announcement after the suspension was the equivalent of a cable news shockwave. Cuomo's 9 p.m. program is frequently CNN's most watched hour of the day, meaning that's when they're making most of their money. He is a larger-than-life presence at the network, and he was determined to stay on TV this year, despite a flurry of sexual misconduct allegations against his brother, which culminated in the governor's resignation 3 months ago. So that is just some of what CNN Business said. And so, podcast listeners, I just want to remind you about Chris Cuomo and Governor Cuomo. Because do you remember when Governor Cuomo received an Emmy on the way he handled the coronavirus epidemic in the state of New York? He received an Emmy. So this is all tied into CNN and the way MSNBC, but particularly CNN, covered Governor Andrew Cuomo. Because when you have a sick media, when journalism is sick, and in journalism today, they've got cancer, right? Our mainstream media has cancer. They're not just sick, they're near terminal. When that happens, you don't have any real check and balance between the media and the politicians, who are many times corrupt or doing really bad things. And so I mentioned the Emmy that Governor Cuomo received. And if you recall, and I'll read this to you, in the AP News, in January of this year, January of 2021, roughly a year after the pandemic started, that is, New York data show nursing home deaths undercounted by thousands. By thousands. That was at the beginning of this year. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration confirmed Thursday, so this was in January. Again, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration confirmed in January of 2021 that thousands more nursing home residents died of COVID-19 than the state official tallies had previously acknowledged, dealing a potential blow to his image as a pandemic hero. The surprise development, okay, this is in the AP News, the surprise development. Do you think this was a surprise development to the citizens of New York State, and in particular of the very crowded areas of New York, like Long Island and New York City and all the boroughs? No. It was common knowledge that people were dropping dead left and right in nursing homes. Common knowledge. And common knowledge that things were not being run properly, in large part because Andrew Cuomo made the decision of putting COVID-positive patients in nursing homes. In other words, when a patient was tested in a hospital and that patient in 2020 had COVID, but they weren't so sick that they needed to be hospitalized, they were sent to where? They were sent to a nursing home. And then all these people in the nursing home got COVID because they were locked down in the same building, and thousands of them died. Why does this matter with Fredo Cuomo and Governor Cuomo? Well, it matters because when you have thousands upon thousands of people dying in nursing homes, and you have a gentleman who is the top income producer at CNN, and his brother's also the governor of Florida, the governor of New York. He wished he was the governor of Florida. And his brother's the governor of New York. And the CNN anchor doesn't even try to investigate all of the calls that you know that they were receiving from really concerned kids about their grandparents or their parents dying in nursing homes. No investigative journalism whatsoever. Completely and utterly covered up, not just by CNN, but all of mainstream media. But CNN was in a unique position to cover it up because of Fredo Cuomo, Chris Cuomo. And so more information in this AP news story in January of this year. The surprise development that thousands of more people died in nursing homes than were reported after months of the states refusing to divulge its true numbers, showed that at least 12,743 long-term care residents in nursing homes died of the virus as of January the 19th, 2021, far greater than the official tally of 8,505 on that day, cementing New York's toll as one of the highest in the nation. I'm sure it was the highest in the nation because I'm sure even then that number is underreported. So if you're a critical thinker, podcast listeners, and you have 12,743 elderly patients who've died over the course of 12 months in nursing homes, and you never really heard about this in any of the mainstream media, and you would think that the media would be knocking on the doors of nursing homes and nursing home executives and the state and the regulators that work for the state to find out what the heck is going on or what happened. Even after the fact, there still wasn't investigative journalism. The only reason why this was ever reported to begin with is because of all of the family members of the deceased who kept calling and kept reporting things and called their elected officials in Albany to find out what is being done, who's going to be held to account. So the article continues, those numbers, the 12,743 deaths, are consistent with a report released just hours earlier by State Attorney General Letitia James, charging that the nursing home death count could be off by about 50%, largely because New York is one of the only states to count just those who died on facility grounds, not those who died later in the hospital. Can you imagine? So in New York State, the state decided that a nursing home death from COVID only counted if the death occurred while the individual was still in their bed in the nursing home. But if the individual was rushed to the hospital, having received COVID from the COVID-positive patients that were intentionally placed there by the Andrew Cuomo administration, and the person then later died in the hospital, that wasn't counted. That wasn't a COVID death counted as a result of a nursing home patient. So it could be 20,000, 24,000, 25,000 people. It could be double the 12,743 people. Quote, while we cannot bring back the individuals we lost to this crisis, this report seeks to offer transparency that the public deserves, Letitia James said in a statement. Now, this is the same individual, by the way, that's prosecuting Governor Cuomo for the sexual assault cases. But there is, to my knowledge, no actual case against the governor or against the nursing homes or anyone else for that matter for literally causing the murder of well over 10,000 people and perhaps as many as 25,000 of our most helpless and weak people in nursing homes. Just disgusting. And so why does this matter? It matters because here we are talking about Fredo Cuomo, who finally has been suspended indefinitely, according to CNN. And we have CNN that knew through Chris Cuomo, there's no doubt about it, that all of these nursing home patients were literally murdered. They were murdered because COVID positive patients were put inside their buildings. They were sent there by the hospitals, and which of course is the worst possible place that you could send them, which even then raises the question, was this intentional? Were you trying to wipe out the elderly in nursing home? I mean, certainly any reasonable person would ask that question. And so CNN knew all this was happening. Chris Cuomo knew all of this was happening. I have no doubt in my mind that the Andrew Cuomo administration, the governor of New York, was probably called by Chris, or they called each other and talked many times, in which case Cuomo was probably saying to his brother at CNN, as well as to MSNBC and all the other media outlets, hey, don't report on any of this stuff regarding all of these old people that are dying. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it because, and guess what? CNN did not. They didn't. They just didn't investigate. They didn't cover it. Journalism has cancer in America. And yet, finally, CNN has gotten rid of one of its biggest cancers, Chris Cuomo. But what they should really do is fire everybody at the network, one by one, and replace them one by one and get in people that actually really want to investigate any kind of report, whatever it may be, and wherever the truth takes you, report it. Report the truth where it takes you. So if you also recall, it wasn't just that the nursing home deaths were grossly undercounted in New York State, but guess what else happened? Governor Cuomo received an Emmy. He received an Emmy because of all of his press conferences in the manner that he had them. They were so impressive. He was so wonderful that he got an Emmy, a TV award, because he's such a great TV personality. What a great governor. He just made us feel so good. I mean, it was so Orwellian, right? Because you got this one guy, everything's fine. Don't worry. Everything's fine. Just keep, locked up down home. And meanwhile, he's killing people in nursing homes, and he gets an Emmy for it. And we have this problem throughout the media. And finally, CNN has done something. So you guys in podcast land are going to love this. Trump, President Trump, who also called Chris Cuomo Fredo, cheers CNN's Cuomo suspension. This is in The Hill magazine. Former President Donald Trump on Tuesday cheered the announcement from CNN that anchor Chris Cuomo would be placed on an indefinite suspension. Trump, who often sparred with the anchor during his 4-year term, what do you mean often, called the move great news for television viewers while speculating whether it had any link to ratings. It's typical Trump. It has nothing to do with ratings. I mean, he was probably kept there because of ratings, but if they're getting rid of him, I'm not sure that has anything to do with ratings. If he's their moneymaker, which he is, Chris Cuomo, they're not going to get rid of him. In any event, quote, in any event, Fredo is gone, Trump said Tuesday, using a nickname he has employed for CNN's Cuomo. And I'm not sure if you remember this, podcast listeners, but whenever either Trump said that or if a regular everyday person saw Chris Cuomo on the street or somewhere and they called him Fredo, apparently he just became enraged. You know, like he was just going to attack you and beat the living heck out of you, which is really kind of funny because it, for whatever reason, it kind of matches the stereotype of what he's being called to begin with, right? It's like, just suck it up and realize when you're a TV personality, people are not going to automatically like you on one side and other side might like you because of your politics. So Cuomo was suspended indefinitely on Tuesday following new revelations about his involvement in the harassment case against his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. And that's in the Hill magazine, but I just have to read this again. Quote, this is what Trump said. In any event, Fredo is gone. He's probably, it's like Trump being Trump. He's probably back there at Mar-a-Lago just like laughing like crazy because this is something that's probably like made his day, if not his week or his month, maybe even his Christmas. So this is important, podcast listeners. We're bringing this up, spending a lot of time on Fredo being suspended indefinitely because we have to ask this question to you. Is this a turning point for the media? Not just for CNN, but is this going to be a turning point for the mainstream media? Is the turning point that they're going to finally clean up their act? Is this that turning point? And I don't know the answer to that question, but obviously, if it is the turning point, and the media does indeed begin to finally hire real journalists, our country will be the better for it. Because if we had a critically thinking media, an honest media, investigative journalists during the beginning of COVID, Andrew Cuomo would have been gone a long time ago because of all of the people that he murdered in nursing homes. And there probably would have been many thousands of people in those nursing homes whose lives would have been spared because the media would have been properly and honestly reporting what was going on. And therefore, New York State would have stopped it immediately because they would realize they couldn't have gotten away with it because the media is that check and balance to crooked politicians and dishonest politicians and incompetent politicians. But we didn't have that at the beginning of COVID. And as a result, at least 12,000 people have died in New York that should never have. And maybe as many as 25,000 elderly people may have died who lived in nursing homes because of the media. You see, I think most people are like, well, it's because of the governor. Yeah, but it's really the media too. This is how important the media is. And so I'm hoping, I'm praying that this is a turning point for the media to clean up its act. Because apparently they're more outraged at sexual harassment, which admittedly is terrible. Of course it is. But they're more outraged at that than they are at 25,000 people dying and being murdered by the governor. Talk about proportion or proportionality. So next up, podcast listeners, we have a defund the candidate in New York City who has his own security detail. I got to say that again. We have a defund the candidate. We have a defund the police candidate in New York City. He's actually running for governor, to be clear. And his name is Jumaine Williams. And he lives on an army base. Okay? He lives on an army base in New York City. This is really kind of a weird setup. You got to follow this. It's just almost hard to believe that such an animal exists. By animal, I'm talking about an army base that a civilian can live in. But anyway, so here's what it says in the New York Post. Gotham's, like Gotham City, Batman, Gotham's far-left public advocate, Jumaine Williams, who's running to become the state's next governor, has pushed to slash funding to the New York Police Department and to the Department of Defense. Brilliant guy. Ugh. Yet he traverses the city with a New York Police Department security detail, and he lives on a U.S. military base where he enjoys free, around-the-clock security. The racial justice advocate resides just off General Lee Avenue, named after the Confederate military leader turned target of cancel culture warriors on the Fort Hamilton U.S. Army garrison in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, racial justice advocate. Anyone, by the way, how can you be a racial justice advocate and have a security detail? Because it's just, by definition, you're anti-police. So if you want to get racial justice, okay. I digress. Anyone who steps foot on the garrison must go through security checkpoints and submit to a background check, a requirement that led to the detainment of an illegal immigrant who was trying to deliver a pizza in 2018. Even so, Williams has pushed for stopping ICE from enforcing the country's immigration laws. Yep. It's one of these, I gotta love the New York Post. It's like whenever you pull it up and you try to read it, they always have these pop-up ads, which is why I stopped there. It drives me crazy. I just want to pull the computer, take the computer and just throw it against the wall with the pop-up ads. Why does Williams live on the base when so much of what it represents is antithetical to his beliefs? The answer, according to a representative, is housing costs. Fort Hamilton offers relatively cheap housing to a sliver of the in-the-know civilians. Quote, when we needed a new home for his family in 2019, they chose a publicly available unit in Fort Hamilton, not because of its position on a base, but because it offered the best unit for his family's price point and criteria, the representative for Williams said, whose taxpayer-funded salary, by the way, is $183,000. So, here's the thing. Williams, his lobbyist wife, and stepdaughter occupy a corner townhouse on this base, military base, with an expansive backyard and water views of the Verrazano Narrows for $4,000 a month. That's really cheap in New York if you can have a house with a yard. It's almost unheard of for $4,000 a month. Similar properties on surrounding public streets rent for $5,800 a month. There are 228 homes on the garrison, and 15 are occupied by civilians who have to join a wait list, to move in. It's incredible. So this guy's a civilian. He lives on a military base because the military base allows a certain limited number of civilians to live there. He lives in military housing at a significantly reduced rate. The base, of course, is gated with guards. And then when he leaves there, he has the NYPD as his personal security detail. And he's running for governor of New York. And one of the things he wants to do is to defund the police. He wants to defund the police. And this is my problem that I have with where so many progressive blacks have gone. By the way, progressive whites too, of course. That's kind of a no-brainer. But disproportionately, let's be honest, it's the progressive blacks who want to defund the police who are hurting their communities more than any other. Of course. It's a no-brainer. And this is all tied directly to this Rittenhouse matter, where Rittenhouse is found not guilty for engaging in self-defense. And then you have this guy in New York City who wants to defund the police. So you're not allowed to be Kyle Rittenhouse. You're not allowed to defend yourself. But the guy that wants to defund the police in New York, the entire state, he wants to defund them because he wants to run for governor. He's got his own detail, and he lives in a gated community guarded by armed guards. And speaking of which, the self-defense matter of Rittenhouse, Governor DeSantis of Florida, got to bring this up. It's a little long, this clip. It's about 1 minute and 12 seconds long. It's really epic because DeSantis takes on this whole matter of the inability of the media to just report things the way they are, rather than censor themselves if the murderer looks a certain way. We can't heal as a country if we can't be honest and report things that are happening. We can't heal as a country if we can't report that early on during COVID, thousands of people were dying in nursing homes because of the stupidity of the governor of New York. We can't heal as a country until we have a media that's willing to properly report on crimes, no matter who commits them, and calling them out for what they are, right? They're crimes. It's an individual. He's either black or he's white. This is what he did. Just report it. Just be honest. Well, DeSantis was asked this question, this matter on self-defense, and he just took it on. He just took on the Rittenhouse thing on, and he also took on the running over of all of those people in the parade at Waukesha and in Wisconsin. And this is just epic. So I want you to hear DeSantis on this. This is, as I said, it's 1 minute and 12 seconds long. It's worth listening to. We had that clip, and here it is.
Is that how it works? The SUVs, they just drive by themselves? This just kind of happened? And they say, oh, this was a big accident. You never actually hear the discussion about who committed this, what was the motivation. This guy was a career criminal, let out on, didn't really have any bail, basically, should not have even been on the street, had clear anti-white animus, and this was an intentional act. And it seems like, for corporate press, they're more apt to characterize a parent who goes to a school board meeting to protest bad policies as a domestic terrorist than somebody who intentionally rams an SUV into a crowd of innocent people. So you have at least 6 have died. You have many more that have been injured. I know many people are in the hospital. And so let's just be clear. This was not a car just driving in. This was an attack by a felon who did that, who should not have been on the street. And we'll see what the actual motivation was. It very well may have been in response to what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. And you have to wonder if that's the case. Almost assuredly, this guy's view of Rittenhouse was colored by all these media lies.
And that's, podcast listeners, why we played this clip. Because we're talking about Fredo being suspended. And we talked about this defund the candidate, this candidate who wants to defund the police in New York. And here you have the governor of Florida saying, we see what this gentleman did in Wisconsin and Waukesha, where he used his SUV to murder people, maim people, an awful thing that he did. And DeSantis goes on to say the gentleman was black. Media won't talk about that. They're saying it was a car or an SUV that ran into people. No, because the SUV had someone behind the wheel. And DeSantis ended that statement, a straightforward, factual statement, by saying, this gentleman who committed this awful crime in Waukesha, Wisconsin, by running over people, man, I just can't imagine what a horrible death that is, and maiming others, this gentleman, his point of view was probably peppered by the media's response to the Rittenhouse case. And this goes to how our media has cancer. And getting rid of Cuomo, Chris Cuomo, and Fredo is a great thing, right? But there's so much more work to do. We're not trying to cancel the media. And I just want to make this clear. We're not trying to cancel media. What we're trying to do is to make media well again, to get rid of the cancer, to remove the cancer, so that the media can go into remission, and the media can actually start reporting properly by saying, you know what? When you have a guy who takes an SUV and he's black and he decides to run over a bunch of white people, the chances are pretty good that it's directly connected to the Rittenhouse verdict, since it happened like the next day or 2 days later. And does the media play a role in the responsibility of, inciting people to do these? Of course they play a role, because they're incapable of just reporting things as they are, which, by the way, The American people can handle it. We can handle listening to news that is honest and just reports the way things are. We're okay with that. But you know what? It takes the governor of Florida just to say it the way it is. And when he does so, he's just blunt, straightforward. He kind of takes the emotion out of it and then really articulates so well, because it enables us to see how sick our country has gotten itself, because the media has caused much of that. And this is the part that I think is important. You'll hear so many others and so many other podcasts talk about, and the media and big tech. And yeah, it's like, yeah, whatever. That's all true. But they're actually causing harm, great harm to our country. And they no doubt, MSNBC and CNN in particular, NBC, CBS, ABC, I hold them responsible for causing this gentleman and Waukesha to be militarized enough to kill a bunch of people simply because of the way they look. I hold the media responsible for that, just like I hold the media responsible for not investigating and not calling out the governor of New York when there were thousands of people dying early on during the pandemic in nursing homes in New York. The media could have fixed and corrected that situation by overwhelmingly reporting it day in and day out. Why are we doing what? Why are we continuing to do what we're doing when we have all these people dying? That's what a healthy media would do. And so getting rid of Fredo, oh my gosh, it's just epic. It's finally time. Finally time. And speaking of the defunding that candidate, the candidate wants to defund the police in New York, you know, the same candidate that has the security detail, Jermaine Williams, that I was talking to you about a few minutes ago. Well, we see what that looks like in San Francisco, and I'm really proud here at Mark and the Millennials because we had on this podcast like a year ago as our dumbest bill, a bill that was proposed in San Francisco. It was proposed. So it was a bill, so it was a law that had not yet been passed in San Francisco that was going to decriminalize theft up to $950. So you steal something that's less than $950, you get a citation, right? Like a parking ticket. And you just walk away. Of course, if you stole the thing, you're sure as heck not going to pay the citation or show up to court, right? I mean, but that was a proposed law. And I'm very proud to say that we here in Mark and the Millennials talked about that proposed bill a year ago. And then I think we did it like at least one more time, maybe two more times. And we talked about it again when it actually became a law. As the dumbest bill in America. And now we see in San Francisco this modern dystopia that you have these wonderful stores, small, medium, large, some really ritzy stores, and they're just getting ripped off left and right because of the defund the police movement combined with what clearly is one of the dumbest bills in America and dumbest laws in America, which is the decriminalization of theft up to $950 in San Francisco. So the Babylon Bee has an article out. San Francisco stores hold 100% off Black Friday sale. We got to laugh at this because otherwise, you know, you would cry at what's happening to the great city of San Francisco and what the left does to destroy cities. I mean, they have no shame. They just don't care. But here's the article. San Francisco, California. In a beloved San Francisco tradition, stores across the city are holding their annual 100% off Black Friday sale today, offering shoppers the opportunity to come in, throw as much stuff in a bag as they can fit, and run out of the store. Quote, come on, come one, come all, and check out these amazing discounts, said the manager of one San Francisco Walgreens. You can get makeup, electronics, what is that? Sunglasses, You name it, even prescription medications. One shopper said she had just had to go check out the savings on designer handbags. Yeah, I don't really like going out into the crowds, but for 100% off, sure, I'll go. I'll throw on a ski mask and some gloves and grab as many Gucci purses as possible. What's more, shops across San Francisco are offering an extended return policy on all goods taken from the store during these amazing 100% off bargain sales, so you can bring that big TV screen back if it doesn't end up fitting, or you can flip it on your offer up for a tidy profit. At publishing time, the stores had confirmed they will be holding this sale every day for the foreseeable future, or at least as long as the Democrats remain in office. So, way to go, Babylon Bee. There's not only sad truth to that satire, but it is absolutely, completely, and utterly true, at least the part that you have these gangs of thieves who are literally destroying the central business district in San Francisco and throughout the country. They're not being held to account, and the Democrats are still doubling down on stupid, which is to defund the police and all these other things, including saying Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist because he dared to defend himself. This is your modern day left. And podcast listeners, if you don't think for 1 minute that the Republicans aren't going to romp the Democrats in 2022, you have lost your minds. The Democrats are going to lose not just state houses, they're going to lose state legislatures. I'm convinced. Are they going to lose all? Of course not. Because in the crazy places like California and Maryland and Connecticut and New York and Illinois, no, you're not going to have a flip of the legislatures, at least not today. But if this craziness continues, you will see common sense and critically thinking people who otherwise would always vote for a progressive say, you know what? This is really not good. And I don't care what the party affiliation is of the person running. If they're going to bring order back to our city and they're going to bring common sense back to our city, I'm going to vote for them. Don't be surprised if that happens. It's definitely going to happen in many states that aren't the lost causes like California and Maryland and New York. Obviously, I always remain hopeful for my home state of Maryland. But the fact of the matter is every time I remain hopeful, my hometown city of Baltimore, where I don't live anymore, thankfully, I say thankfully, not because I don't wish them well. I do wish them well, but unfortunately, they keep electing the same idiots to represent them. And those same idiots are the cancel the police people. And they are, let's cancel the police. No bond, no bails. You can't hold them in jail after they commit a crime. Of course not. And then, the graft that goes on there, which is why nothing works properly, right? You just pay people off and, it all goes away. This is what Democrat cities look like. So next up, podcast listeners, we talked yesterday with Dr. Jim Small, who was terrific. We do intend to have him back, hopefully next week, maybe, if not the week after that. But when we're with Dr. Jim Small, he spoke of the Omicron variant, and we spoke about that briefly, but we spoke a lot about, of course, informed consent. If you didn't hear that podcast, it is really worth hearing because Dr. Small did a terrific job in informing me and our podcast listeners how important that concept is and how foundational it is to healthcare and to our freedoms. Well, despite the Omicron strain variant that's come out, CNBC host Jim Cramer, goes on this insane rant yesterday where he demands that Joe Biden impose a universal vaccine mandate enforced by the military because of the new Omicron variant. So CNBC host and self-described germaphobe Jim Cramer on Monday went on an insane rant and called on Joe Biden to impose a universal vaccine mandate enforced by the military. Folks, CNBC is NBC. They're one and the same. This is your mainstream media. We spent a lot of time on this podcast talking about how Fredo is gone. All right, he's gone off of CNN, thankfully, at least indefinitely, according to them, because of the crooked reporting, let alone lack of reporting. And we've talked about how reporting, if done properly, can actually save lives and make our country healthier again. And then we have CNBC, a host saying they're going to enforce. I mean, how would that look if it was enforced by the military? Would you have soldiers coming to your door and then they would hold you down as they roll up your sleeve and give you the jab? You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to hold you down now. Here you go. I mean, what kind of society do we have when we have a media that thinks even the suggestion of that is okay? And this guy, Jim Cramer, if you haven't heard of him before, he's this bald dude on CNN who is one of their anchors with respect to, money matters, Mad Money. I think that's one of his shows, or the name of one of his programs. And he talks about investing and the stock market and so forth. It's like and the guy is a complete idiot. I mean, if you ever listen to him, he's first of all, he's annoying, first of all, because he like yells the entire time that he's talking. But he goes on this rant. And the rant is just so weird. Well, look, podcast listeners, we have the clip. And here it is.
Lord knows what happened if you didn't partake. But back then, anyone who refused to get vaccinated would get ratted out immediately because we knew that person could hurt other people. The commonweal was a commonweal. Now we're engaged in a similar struggle with COVID, and Eisenhower would be aghast. We have immunocompromised people who are incubators for every variant to come, walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic. We have companies that have tried hard to get people vaccinated and now backing down. We have governors who want to be president by grandstanding on a foolish states' right issue, the right to get sick, get other people sick. So it's time to admit that we have to go to war against COVID. Require vaccination universally. Have the military run it. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you better be ready to prove your conscientious objector status in court. And even then, you need to help in the war effort by staying home until we finally beat this thing.
Folks, that happened yesterday. That rant that you just heard from a major news anchor and a major news channel happened yesterday. And so, to recap what he said, there are no states' rights. The use of the military should be used against U.S. citizens. House arrest for the unvaccinated without due process. And to heck with the First Amendment. And to heck with the Fourth Amendment. But literally, that's what this guy said. And I have to say that our media has cancer. Because a normal news anchor would understand that most Americans, especially of a business channel, because you would think that people that would watch a business channel would be like a little bit more informed about things because they're watching the business channel to get informed about stocks and bonds and treasury bills and the economy. I mean, who on earth would listen to a channel like that with somebody telling you that you don't have any rights? There's no constitution. What is wrong with you? You're not supposed to listen to that. I mean, the once again, not to belabor this one, but the Babylon Bee has this is one of the funnier ones, says white smoke emanates from the Wuhan lab chimney, signaling a new variant has been named. So, of course, in the Catholic Church, if there is a death of a pope, then all of is it the cardinals or the bishops? I think it's the cardinals. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it is. It's the cardinals. They all meet together in the Vatican and they choose a new pope. And when a new pope is chosen, there is white smoke that comes out of the chimney of the Vatican. And so that signals that a new pope has been chosen. Well, the Babylon Bee says, White smoke emanates from the Wuhan lab chimney, signaling a new variant has been named. But we shouldn't stop there, because good old Peter Doocy and Jen Psaki, they're still sparring as well every day. I mean, you don't just have Jim Cramer, who's basically saying we live in a Marxist country where you have no rights and the military now controls your body. And as we've talked before in this podcast, you know, it was my main objection to Obamacare was the fact that I saw this day coming. The day when the government says, I own your body. I own your body. I own your life. You don't control your life. And that really takes us, back before the Enlightenment. But Democrats don't care, man. They're ready to go right back to the Dark Ages. And they're perfectly okay with it. But Peter Doocy, sparring with Jen Psaki over xenophobic travel bans and Biden's maskless shopping trips. So this is connected to this whole Omicron strain that's coming out of Africa, apparently. And there are lots of discussions in the White House, and of course by Jim Cramer of CNBC and others, about how we should go back to lockdowns and mask mandates and you name it, travel bans. I mean, just go right down the list. In other words, take us back to where we have no freedoms. I mean, government is really getting used to and really loving the way they get to control every aspect of our lives. They're really getting into it. I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point, especially the federal government, but some state governments as well. So, Peter Doocy, as you would expect, he asks Jen Psaki about masks, and we're going to start that all over again. And we just saw the president go inside of a store, and he's in a store, and the store is packed with people. It looks like a retail store. It's packed with people. And there's a president of the United States in the store, and he's got his mask completely pulled down, still around his ears, but completely pulled and under his chin. And so this is the same dude that's telling us that we might have to be locked down again because of the Omicron variant, and we might have to wear masks all of the time. And it's going to be more mandates, more edicts from the king. So Peter Doocy, like the only journalist in the Washington press corps, literally, who actually asks the tough questions. I'm still shocked that Jen Psaki even calls on him. I mean, that's a whole different thing. It's like, I'm shocked that they do. But they do. They call him Peter Doocy every time, so that's fair. Ask Jen Psaki, look, if we're going to have to wear masks again, we're going to be locked down again, why is the president of the United States going inside of a retail store packed with people shoulder to shoulder and pulls his mask down? We have that clip, and here it is.
Okay, we saw the president shopping indoors on Saturday behind glass that says face covering required, but his face was uncovered. Why?
The president is somebody who follows the recommendations and the advice of the CDC. I don't know what the circumstances were of that particular moment.
So, Jen Psaki, the president is definitely following the advice of the CDC. Well, no, he's not, because, he's almost 80 years old, and he's inside of a store, shoulder to shoulder with all kinds of people, and he has his mask pulled down. And he just put in travel restrictions against the southern tier of Africa and is looking at doing further lockdowns because of the Omicron variant and mask mandates. And this guy, the president of the United States, is inside of a store and there's no mask. The American people are tired of this nonsense. They're tired of it. And they see how ridiculous this is, because Jen's like, well, the president's following the CDC. Well, here's the thing. If you're the president of the United States and you're 79 years old, you're almost 80 years old, and you've been twice vaxxed and you've gotten the booster, but you could still get COVID because people are getting COVID. I just had a friend the other day who had both vaccinations. He had both shots from Pfizer. He got the booster. He's not 70 years old, but he's over 65. I think he's around 67 years old. He's a little overweight. and he got COVID and he got pretty sick. Not sick enough to go to the hospital, but he got sick enough to be in bed for a solid week. And so the point here, podcast listeners, is you have Peter Doocy asking Jen Psaki, and she's like, well, he's following the CDC because, it's okay when you're the president of the United States. You don't get COVID when you're inside of a retail store with wall-to-wall people because you're the president of the United States and everybody's coming around you and trying to touch you and, you're buying stuff. You can pull your mask down, but the others have to wear their mask. You know what? I know podcast listeners, you're so tired of hearing this mask stuff, and I am too. And this is why we should just go back to being a free country. You want to wear a mask, wear a mask. You don't wear one. And please, Mr. President, and please, Congress, stop treating us like we're subjects. We're not subjects. And please, and I do pray for this, I pray that our media gets well, and people like Jim Cramer of CNBC, who basically said the military should come in and vax you, or else. I pray that our media has the cancer cut out from it, and that it can finally, and I mean finally, get well, and we can finally have real journalists who do their job, and that is the job of saving democracy and keeping democracy in check so that it doesn't go down that dark place of totalitarianism or of Marxism or of communism or of any of the isms, that we remain a free country with a strong press that is willing to do its job. And thank God, getting rid of Fredo is the first step. Well, that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.